Charlotte Bennett stood in the bridal suite, her fingers trembling against the silk of her wedding gown. Just minutes before she was supposed to walk down the aisle, Ethan Miller, her executive assistant, reached for the zipper at her back. His hand hesitated. His voice dropped to a whisper that cut through the air like broken glass. "Your groom's not coming." She froze. Hundreds of guests were waiting. Her reputation, her career, the perfect image she had built for years, all of it could collapse in minutes. In her panic, she turned to the only man standing beside her and made a decision no one would expect. Could a fake wedding hide a broken heart? The bridal suite smelled like white roses and expensive perfume. Charlotte Bennett stood in front of the full-length mirror, her reflection sharp and composed. The wedding gown fit perfectly. Every detail had been planned down to the second. She had built her company from the ground up, survived hostile boardrooms, and negotiated deals that made grown men sweat. This wedding was supposed to be the final piece, the proof that she could have it all. Ethan Miller stood near the door, his phone pressed to his ear. He had been making calls for the past 20 minutes. His jaw was tight. Charlotte watched him through the mirror, her stomach twisting in a way she refused to acknowledge. Ethan had been her executive assistant for 4 years. He knew her schedule better than she did. He knew when she needed coffee, when she needed silence, and when she needed someone to tell her the truth. Right now, his silence was louder than anything he could say. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. His eyes met hers in the mirror. She saw the answer before he spoke. "Still nothing," Ethan said quietly. His voice was steady, but there was a crack underneath. "I've tried his phone, his assistant, his driver. No one knows where he is." Charlotte turned away from the mirror. Her hand smoothed down the front of her dress, a habit she had when she needed to think. The ceremony was supposed to start in 15 minutes. The venue was packed. Business partners, investors, media contacts, people who had flown in from 3 different countries to see Charlotte Bennett finally settle down. The woman who had spent 2 decades building an empire was getting married. It was the kind of story people loved, except the groom was missing. She glanced at Ethan. He was 42, a single father who had lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago. He wore a simple black suit, understated and professional. He never overstepped, never offered opinions unless she asked. In a world full of people who wanted something from her, Ethan Miller just did his job. "Maybe there's traffic," Charlotte said. The words sounded weak even to her own ears. Ethan's expression didn't change. He didn't lie to her. That was one of the reasons she trusted him. "There's no traffic," he said. "I checked the route. It's clear." Charlotte felt something cold settle in her chest. She walked to the window and gazed down at the courtyard below. Guests were already seated. White chairs lined up in perfect rows. A string quartet played softly. Everything was ready. Everything except the man who was supposed to meet her at the altar. She had met David Harrington 2 years ago at a charity gala. He was successful, charming, and knew how to handle the kind of life she lived. He didn't flinch when she worked late or canceled plans. He understood ambition, or at least, that's what she thought. They had dated for 18 months before he proposed. It was logical, practical. 2 people who wanted the same things building a life together. But now, standing in a wedding dress with her assistant, as the only witness to her panic, Charlotte realized she couldn't remember the last time David had gazed at her the way Ethan was now. Like she mattered. Like her pain was something worth acknowledging. "What do I do?" she asked. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Ethan crossed the room and stood beside her. He didn't touch her. He just remained there, solid and present. "You have options," he said carefully. "You can delay the ceremony. Tell the guests there's been a situation, or you can cancel it entirely." Charlotte shook her head. "If I cancel, it's a scandal. Every investor, every partner, will start asking questions. They'll wonder if I'm unstable. If I can't manage my personal life, how can I manage a company? She hated how true it was. The world didn't forgive women for falling apart, not women like her. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone again and checked the screen. His face went still. "What?" Charlotte demanded. He turned the phone toward her. A message from David's assistant. Short? Clinical. "Mr. Harrington sends his regrets. He's unable to attend today. He will be in touch." Charlotte stared at the words. Unable to attend. Like it was a business meeting. Like she was just another appointment he could reschedule. The room tilted. She reached out, and Ethan caught her arm, steadying her. His grip was firm but careful. "He's not coming," she whispered. The reality of it crashed down. "He's not coming, and he didn't even have the decency to tell me himself." Ethan's hand was still on her arm. She could feel the warmth of it through the fabric of her dress. "I'm sorry," he said, and she believed him. Charlotte pulled away and turned back to the mirror. Her makeup was flawless. Her hair was perfect. She appeared like a woman who had everything under control. But inside, she was unraveling. "They're all waiting," she said. 300 people. The press is outside. If I walk out there and tell them the groom didn't show up, it's over. My reputation, my credibility, everything." Ethan didn't argue. He knew how the world worked. He had seen her fight for every inch of respect she had earned. "Then what do you want to do?" he asked. Charlotte studied him, really studied him. Ethan Miller, who had never asked her for anything, who had held her company together during her worst days, who had stayed late when everyone else went home, who was here now in a bridal suite because he was the only person she trusted not to lie to her. An idea formed. It was reckless, insane. But the alternative was walking out there and admitting that she had been abandoned, that the man she was supposed to marry had chosen to run instead of face her. "I need you to do something for me," she said slowly. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. Ethan frowned. "Anything." Charlotte stepped closer. She reached up and straightened his tie. Her hands were shaking. But she forced them to be still. "I need you to walk me down that aisle," she said. "And when we get to the altar, I need you to stand beside me. As the groom." Ethan's eyes widened. For the first time since she had known him, he appeared genuinely shocked. "Charlotte, you can't be serious." "I am," she said. Her voice was sharp now, the CEO voice she used in boardrooms. "I can't cancel this wedding. I can't stand in front of everyone and admit that I was left at the altar. But if I walk out there with you, no one will know. We go through the ceremony, we take the photos, we get through today, and then we figure out the rest later." Ethan shook his head. "This is crazy. People will ask questions. Your family. His family." "David's family isn't here," Charlotte said. "They're in Europe, and my family is small. They'll believe whatever I tell them. As for everyone else, they don't know David well enough to notice the difference from a distance." Ethan stared at her. She could see him processing, calculating. He was logical, just like her. He knew how impossible this was, but he also knew her well enough to understand that she wasn't asking lightly. "Why me?" he asked finally. Charlotte met his eyes. "Because you're the only person in this building I trust, and because you're here." It was the truth, stripped down and raw. Ethan gazed at her for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly and ran a hand through his hair. "If we do this," he said quietly, "you understand, it's just for today. Just to get you through the ceremony." "I understand," Charlotte said. He nodded. Then, against every logical instinct he had, he held out his arm. "Then let's go," he said. Charlotte took his arm. Her fingers curled around the fabric of his suit jacket. She could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. They walked to the door. Outside, the music had changed. The processional was starting. In a few seconds, the doors would open, and she would walk down the aisle. Not with the man she had planned to marry, but with the man who had just agreed to save her from the most humiliating moment of her life. Ethan glanced at her one last time. "You sure about this?" Charlotte lifted her chin. "No, but I don't have a choice." The doors opened. Light flooded in. The guests rose to their feet. The string quartet played. And Charlotte Bennett, CEO, control expert, woman who never let anyone see her weak, walked down the aisle on the arm of her executive assistant, pretending that everything was exactly as it should be. The aisle stretched ahead like a trap. Charlotte kept her eyes forward, her hand locked around Ethan's arm. She could feel the weight of every gaze on her. 300 people watching, cameras flashing from the back row, where the press had been allowed exactly 2 seats. She had planned this moment down to the placement of each candle. She had picked the flowers herself. She had imagined walking toward David, seeing him smile, knowing that she had finally achieved the life she was supposed to want. Instead, she was walking toward an altar with a man who wore a guest suit, not a groom's tuxedo. A man whose daughter was probably at home with a babysitter right now, wondering why her father had to work on a Saturday. Charlotte's throat tightened. She forced the feeling down. She had spent 38 years learning how to control her face. She would not break now. Ethan's steps were measured, steady. He didn't glance at the guests. He focused straight ahead, his expression calm. If he was terrified, he didn't show it. Charlotte wondered how he did that, how he could step into the center of a disaster and act like it was just another task on a list. They reached the altar. The officiant waited there, a kind-faced woman in her 60s who had performed hundreds of weddings. She smiled at Charlotte, then glanced at Ethan. Her eyes flickered with brief confusion, but she recovered quickly. Professionals always did. Ethan released Charlotte's arm and turned to face her. The guests sat down. The string quartet faded into silence. And suddenly, it was just the 2 of them there, pretending to be something they weren't. The officiant opened her book and began. Her voice was warm, practiced. She talked about love and commitment and the journey 2 people take together. Charlotte barely heard the words. She was too aware of Ethan's presence beside her, too aware of the lie they were telling, too aware that somewhere David Harrington was doing something else. Anything else. And he had chosen not to be here. The officiant asked them to join hands. Ethan's fingers closed around hers. His hands were warm, steady. She had shaken his hand 1,000 times in meetings, passed him documents. But this was different. This was intimate in a way that made her chest ache. She gazed up at him, and he returned her gaze. His eyes were gray, she realized. She had worked with him for 4 years and never noticed. "Do you, Charlotte Ann Bennett," the officiant said, "take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Charlotte's mind went blank. For one horrible second, she couldn't remember what she was supposed to say. Then Ethan's thumb brushed against the back of her hand. Just once. A small, grounding touch. "I do," she said. Her voice came out clear. The officiant turned to Ethan. "And do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Ethan didn't turn away from Charlotte. His expression was unreadable. "I do," he said. The words hung in the air. They weren't real. They were a performance. But there, with his hands holding hers and his eyes steady on her face, Charlotte felt something shift, something she didn't have time to name. The officiant nodded to the ring bearer. A nephew of David's who didn't know the man at the altar wasn't his uncle. The boy stepped forward with the rings. Charlotte's hands shook as she took one. It was a simple gold band, meant for David. She slid it onto Ethan's finger. It fit. Of course it fit. The universe had a terrible sense of humor. Ethan took the other ring. Charlotte's engagement ring was already on her finger, a diamond she had picked out herself because David had been too busy with a merger to go shopping. Ethan slid the wedding band on carefully, his fingers gentle. When he let go, she felt the weight of it, a symbol of something that didn't exist. "By the power vested in me," the officiant said, smiling, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Charlotte's heart stopped. They hadn't discussed this. She had been so focused on getting through the ceremony that she hadn't thought about the kiss, about the moment everyone would be watching. Ethan leaned in slowly. His hand came up to cup her cheek. It was the kind of gesture that appeared tender from a distance. Up close, Charlotte could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes asked her a silent question. She gave the smallest nod. He kissed her. It was brief, appropriate. The kind of kiss you gave in front of 300 people and a photographer. But when he pulled back, Charlotte felt like the ground had shifted under her feet. The guests erupted into applause. Cameras flashed. Someone cheered. And Charlotte Bennett, who had just married her executive assistant to avoid a scandal, smiled like it was the happiest day of her life. The reception was held in the estate's grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, a 5-tier cake that had cost more than most people's cars. Charlotte moved through it all like a ghost. She shook hands. She accepted congratulations. She positioned herself next to Ethan while photographers posed them for pictures she would never be able to view again. Ethan played his part perfectly. He kept his hand on her lower back when they walked. He laughed at the right moments. He spoke to guests with the same professional courtesy he used in meetings. No one questioned him. No one asked why the groom appeared different. From a distance, in the chaos of a wedding, one man in a dark suit resembled any other. Charlotte's best friend, Rebecca, hugged her tightly during cocktail hour. "You look beautiful," Rebecca whispered. "I'm so happy for you." Charlotte smiled and said thank you. She didn't mention that the man Rebecca thought was David was actually Ethan. She didn't mention that her real fiancé had disappeared without a word. She just gripped the glass of champagne someone had handed her and tried not to think about how many hours she still had to survive. The first dance was announced. Charlotte and Ethan walked to the center of the dance floor. The lights dimmed. A slow song started, something romantic and meaningless. Ethan placed one hand on her waist and took her other hand in his. They began to move. "You're doing great," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. Charlotte gazed up at him. "I feel like I'm going to throw up." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Don't. It would ruin the dress." She almost laughed. It came out as a choked sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Ethan's hand tightened on her waist. "Breathe," he said. "Just breathe." She did, in and out, focusing on the movement, on the feel of his hand steady against her back, on the fact that he was here, even though he had every reason not to be. "Why did you say yes?" she asked suddenly. Ethan's eyes met hers. "You needed help. That's not a reason." "It's the only reason that matters," he said. The song ended. People clapped. Charlotte and Ethan separated, and she felt the loss of his presence immediately. The rest of the reception blurred together. Toasts were made. The cake was cut. Charlotte smiled until her face hurt. Ethan remained close, always within reach, like he knew she might fall apart if he stepped too far away. By the time the last guest started to leave, Charlotte's feet were bleeding from her heels and her jaw ached from holding her smile. Ethan had removed his jacket hours ago. His tie was loosened. He appeared exhausted. They were alone in a side room, away from the cleanup crew and the lingering stragglers. Charlotte sank into a chair and closed her eyes. For the first time all day, she'd let herself stop performing. "We did it," she said. Her voice was hollow. Ethan sat down across from her. He rolled up his sleeves, and she noticed the ring still on his finger. He followed her gaze and studied it. "I'll give it back," he said quietly. "Keep it," Charlotte said. She didn't know why. Maybe because taking it back felt like admitting the whole day had been a failure. They sat in silence. Then Charlotte's phone buzzed. She pulled it from the hidden pocket in her dress. A message lit up the screen. From David. Her hands went numb. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice sharpening. Charlotte stared at the words. She read them once, twice. They didn't change. "I'm sorry. I wasn't ready to get married. I need time to think. Please understand. No explanation. No real apology. Just a coward's exit." She handed the phone to Ethan without a word. He read the message. His expression darkened. "He waited until now to tell you," Ethan said. His voice was low, controlled, but there was anger underneath. Charlotte felt something inside her crack. All day she had maintained her composure. She had smiled. She had lied. She had walked down an aisle and married a man who wasn't hers to keep her pride intact. And for what? So David could send a text message like she was an inconvenience. "He's not sorry," she whispered. "He's just covering himself." Ethan set the phone down. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes on her face. "You deserved better than this," he said. Charlotte laughed, but it came out bitter. "Did I? I chose him. I said yes when he proposed. I planned a wedding with a man who couldn't even show up." "That's not your fault," Ethan said firmly. "You didn't make him run. He did that on his own." Charlotte shook her head. The tears came before she could stop them. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold them back. But it was useless. Everything she had been holding inside all day came crashing out. The humiliation, the betrayal, the realization that she had built her life around someone who didn't have the courage to be beside her when it mattered. She felt Ethan move. Then his arms were around her, pulling her close. She buried her face in his shoulder and sobbed. He didn't say anything. He just embraced her, one hand against her back, the other cradling her head. He smelled like soap and wedding champagne, and something steady, something real. Charlotte cried until there was nothing left, until her chest ached and her throat was raw. When she finally pulled back, Ethan's shirt was damp with her tears. She tried to apologize, but he shook his head. "Don't," he said. She studied him. His face was serious, but there was something in his eyes, something she had never seen before. Concern, tenderness, maybe even anger, but not at her, at the man who had done this to her. "What do I do now?" she asked. Her voice was broken. Ethan reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek. The gesture was careful, respectful. "Now," he said quietly, "you let yourself fall apart, just for tonight. Tomorrow, you pick yourself back up. But tonight, you don't have to be strong." Charlotte's breath hitched. No one had ever given her permission to break before. No one had ever told her it was okay to stop pretending. "I married you," she said, almost laughing at the absurdity. "I married my assistant to save face, and the man I actually wanted didn't even care enough to call." Ethan didn't flinch. "Then he's a fool." The words settled between them. Simple. True. Charlotte gazed down at her hands, at the rings she was still wearing, at the wedding dress that suddenly felt like a costume she couldn't wait to take off. "This whole day was a lie," she said. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice steady. "Maybe," he said. "But I meant what I said. When I made those promises up there, I meant them, even if they weren't real." Charlotte studied him. His eyes captured hers. "What does that mean?" she whispered. Ethan rose to his feet. He held out his hand. "It means you're not alone," he said. "Not tonight." Charlotte took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. The reception was over. The guests were gone. The lights were dim. And Charlotte Bennett, CEO, control expert, woman who never let anyone see her weak, remained in a ruined wedding dress with her fake husband and wondered how she had ended up here. They left the ballroom through a side exit. The estate grounds were quiet now, the guests gone, the music silenced. Charlotte walked beside Ethan, her heels clicking against the stone pathway. She had stopped crying, but her face felt raw. Her chest felt hollow. She didn't know where they were going. She just knew she couldn't stay in that building anymore. Ethan still carried his jacket over one arm. He had grabbed it on the way out. Ethan led her to a garden bench near the fountain. The water trickled softly in the darkness. He draped his jacket over her shoulders. The night air was cool, and she hadn't realized she was shivering until the warmth of the fabric settled around her. They sat in silence for a long time. Charlotte stared at the fountain, watching the water catch the moonlight. Everything felt surreal. This morning, she had been preparing to marry David Harrington. Now she was sitting in a garden with Ethan Miller, wearing a wedding dress that meant nothing, carrying rings that symbolized a lie. "I should have seen it coming," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Ethan turned toward her. "How could you have?" Charlotte shook her head. "There were signs. He canceled dinners. He stopped asking about my day. He started working later, staying out of town more often. I told myself it was normal, that successful people have demanding lives. But maybe I just didn't want to see the truth." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice measured. "Or maybe he was good at hiding it," Ethan said. "Some people are. They tell you what you want to hear until the moment they can't anymore." Charlotte turned to face him. "Is that what your wife did?" The question hung in the air. She regretted it immediately. It was too personal, too intrusive. But Ethan didn't flinch. "No," he said. "Sarah was honest, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt." His voice softened when he said his wife's name. Charlotte had heard him mention her only once before, in passing, when he had needed to leave early for a parent-teacher meeting. He never talked about his grief. He just carried it quietly, the way he carried everything else. "She was sick for 2 years," Ethan continued. "Cancer. We knew it was coming, but knowing doesn't make it easier. Near the end, she made me promise something." Charlotte waited. The fountain filled the silence. "She made me promise I wouldn't waste my life being afraid," Ethan said. "That I wouldn't let fear keep me from showing up for the people who mattered." Charlotte felt something twist in her chest. "And have you kept that promise?" Ethan gazed at her, his gray eyes steady in the moonlight. "I'm trying," he said. The weight of his words settled between them. Charlotte realized that Ethan had kept his promise today. He had shown up when David hadn't. He had remained beside her when he could have walked away. He had taken vows that weren't real and treated them like they mattered. "I'm sorry," Charlotte said. Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this. I'm sorry I made you stand up there and lie to everyone. You didn't deserve that." Ethan shook his head. "You didn't make me do anything. I chose to help you." "Why?" Charlotte asked. The question came out desperate. "Why would you do that for me? I'm your boss. This isn't your responsibility." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. He studied his hands, at the ring still on his finger. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "Because I've watched you build something incredible," he said. "I've seen you fight for every piece of respect you have, and I've seen how hard you work to keep everyone from seeing that you're human, that you have fears and doubts, just like everyone else." Charlotte's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. "When you asked me to be beside you today," Ethan continued, "I knew it was the hardest thing you'd ever asked anyone. And I knew that if I said no, you would have done it alone. You would have walked out there and faced all those people by yourself. And I couldn't let that happen. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes again. She blinked them back. You're a better person than I am, she whispered. Ethan's expression softened. No, I just know what it's like to be left behind. The truth of it hung between them. Charlotte thought about David's text message, about the casual cruelty of it, about how easy it had been for him to walk away without another thought. He said he wasn't ready, Charlotte said bitterly. After 2 years together, after planning a wedding for 6 months, after making me believe we were building something real, he wasn't ready. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's not about you, that's about him. But what if it is? Charlotte's voice rose. What if I'm the kind of person people leave? What if I'm too focused on work, too demanding, too— Stop, Ethan said firmly. He turned to face her fully, his eyes locking onto hers. A real man doesn't run when things get hard. He doesn't wait until the wedding day to decide he's not ready. He doesn't leave someone at the altar because he's too much of a coward to have a conversation. The words cut through Charlotte's spiral. She stared at him, her breath catching. David didn't leave because of who you are, Ethan continued. He left because of who he is. And you deserve better than someone who can't see what he had. Charlotte felt something break open inside her. Not the sharp crack of earlier, but something softer. Something that had been locked away for too long. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to be the person who gets left. I don't know how to fail. Ethan reached out and took her hand. The gesture was simple, but it grounded her. You're not failing, he said. You're surviving. And tomorrow, you'll start rebuilding. But tonight, you're allowed to feel everything you're feeling. The anger, the hurt, the humiliation, all of it. Charlotte studied their joined hands, at the ring on his finger that she had placed there, at the ring on her own finger that meant nothing now. What do I tell people, she asked, when they ask about today, when they realize David isn't around anymore? Ethan thought for a moment. You tell them the truth, that things changed, that you made the best decision you could with the information you had, and that you're moving forward. Charlotte almost smiled. It was such a diplomatic answer. So perfectly, Ethan. And what about us? She asked quietly. What do we tell people about this? She gestured between them at the absurdity of their situation. Ethan's expression turned serious. We tell them it was a mistake, a moment of panic. We file for an annulment on Monday. We go back to being boss and assistant, and we never talk about this again. It was the logical answer, the safe answer, the answer that would protect both of them from scrutiny and gossip. But hearing it out loud made Charlotte's chest ache in a way she didn't expect. Is that what you want? She asked. Ethan held her gaze. What I want doesn't matter. This was never real. But it felt real, Charlotte said. The words came out before she could stop them. When you held my hand, when you made those vows, when you embraced me while I cried, that felt real. Ethan's expression flickered. Something vulnerable crossed his face before he could hide it. Charlotte, he said carefully, you just went through something traumatic. Your emotions are all over the place. Tomorrow, when you've had time to process, you'll realize this was just adrenaline and shock. Charlotte shook her head. Don't do that. Don't tell me what I'm feeling. I'm trying to protect you, Ethan said. From what? From making another mistake, he said quietly. From confusing gratitude with something else. Charlotte pulled her hand away. She rose to her feet, Ethan's jacket slipping from her shoulders. She felt the anger rise, hot and clarifying. I know the difference, she said sharply. I've spent my entire life analyzing decisions, weighing options, calculating outcomes. I know what gratitude feels like, and I know what this is. Ethan rose as well. He studied her, his expression guarded. "Then what is it?" he asked. Charlotte's breath caught. She didn't have an answer. Not one she was ready to say out loud. Not one that made sense after the worst day of her life. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "But I know it's not nothing." They remained there in the darkness, the fountain trickling behind them, the weight of the day pressing down on both of them. Finally, Ethan spoke. His voice was soft. "I need to go," he said. "My daughter is with a sitter. I told her I'd be home by midnight." Charlotte nodded. Of course, his daughter, his real life, the one that existed outside of this surreal night. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I know it wasn't fair to ask." Ethan picked up his jacket from where it had fallen and draped it back over her shoulders. "You didn't ask," he said. "I offered." He turned to leave, then stopped. He glanced back at her, his eyes shadowed in the moonlight. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I meant what I said up there. When I promised to be by your side. I know it wasn't real, but I meant it anyway." Then he walked away, his footsteps fading into the night. Charlotte remained alone in the garden, wrapped in his jacket, wearing a wedding dress that no longer meant anything. She studied her hands, at the rings she would take off tomorrow, at the life she would have to rebuild from scratch. But for the first time all day, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt like she was on solid ground. Broken, yes. Humiliated, yes. But still here. She thought about what Ethan had said, about showing up, about not running when things got hard, about being the kind of person who stayed. David had run, but Ethan had stayed. And maybe that was the lesson she needed to learn. That love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect weddings. It was about who remained beside you when everything fell apart. Charlotte walked back toward the building, the sound of her heels echoing in the quiet. The night was ending. The worst day of her life was almost over, and tomorrow she would start again. Not as a bride, not as someone's fiancé, just as Charlotte Bennett, CEO, survivor, woman who had been left at the altar and lived to tell about it. She took off the rings and slipped them into the pocket of Ethan's jacket. She would return them on Monday, along with everything else that didn't belong to her. But for now, she let herself feel the weight of the day, the pain, the humiliation, the unexpected tenderness of a man who had promised to be by her side, even when he didn't have to. She realized something in the quiet darkness. Real love wasn't about showing up when everything was easy. It was about showing up when everything was falling apart. And the person who deserved her wasn't the one who made grand promises. It was the one who kept them, even when no one was watching. Sometimes the hardest moments teach us the most important truths. Love isn't measured in diamonds or vows spoken before crowds. It reveals itself when everything crumbles and one person chooses to stay. The person meant for you won't abandon you in your darkest hour. They'll zip up your dress, hold your hand through the lies, and remind you that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about showing up anyway. And sometimes, the person who saves you is standing closer than you ever imagined.